Welcome to another episode of Yu-Gi-Oh! Player Ranks. In this series, we rank various Yu-Gi-Oh! Themes based on your comments and suggestions. Come back every Tier List Tuesday to see an all-new installment of this series. Alright guys, we are back with another tier list. I've already created a playlist of all the tier lists, so if you want to go on the channel, there is a playlist for every single tier list that we have. You can just watch these one after another. And also, would you like to make your Master Duel experience a whole lot better?
Are you ready to take your Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel play experience to a new level? The Untapped GG Companion is here for you. Use the deck tracker to know exactly what cards you have in your deck, and to go over any cards you aren't familiar with yet by hovering over them. It instantly updates when you draw a card, and automatically hides if you check your extra deck or graveyard. This is the perfect tool to help you master a new deck. The Untapped GG Companion also lets you import decks directly into the game in seconds. Copy any YDK or YDKE deck string, create a new deck in game, click the Start Auto Import button, and let us take the wheel. Once the duel is over, check your win rate on your personal stats page. Brag among your friends and share your decks so they can import them into the game too. Start your path to master today by downloading the Untapped GG Companion at ygom.untapped.gg.
Alright, so for this tier list today, we are reviewing all of the different modes, the special themes that we have for Yu-Gi-Oh! The special events. We're reviewing every single one that they've had so far. They've all been somewhat interesting, and we can definitely talk about them. But let's not waste too much time. Let's start off with the first one, which is Duelist Cup. I used to love Duelist Cup. Like the first one, I actually really liked a lot, but I am just absolutely sick and tired of Duelist Cup. We had a Duelist Cup in October, and then we had a festival, and then we had another Duelist Cup. I'm just tired of it. It is essentially just ranked as an event, and it's really annoying, and I understand it's one of the ways that they can accumulate information on what decks are competitive and which decks aren't competitive, and that's all fine about it, but it's incredibly frustrating when you're looking forward to some sort of change of pace in the game, because you've been playing ranked all month long and you're playing against Pearly and Kashtira and Despia and getting locked out of your extra deck and anti-meta, and you're playing against all of these decks that you just absolutely don't want to play against, and you want to play something fun, and then the middle of the month rolls around, you have to play essentially another more ranked. It's like double ranked, and like I said, at first I liked the Duelist Cup because it gave us competitive results and showed us like what to play, but it's gotten to the point where it is honestly kind of just frustrating to see, because again, it's just more ranked ladder all over again. And I understand, again, the results are important, but it's just kind of frustrating. Zero extra deck, I'd say is a D tier one for me. Obviously, these are all on personal opinions, so there's no point to get offended. Just put your opinion down below. It's not the end of the world. But this is the zero extra deck one, extra deck zero. So essentially, this is one where you just can't use the extra deck. Certain decks benefit from that, so you can play like True Dracos, but a lot of it's hit. You can play like, I don't know, what else can you play? Like any tribute deck you can really use. So Monarchs, any control trap deck you can use because they don't really use the extra deck. Stuff like that. And then of course you have Fluenderies, which is like by far the best deck in the entire thing. If I remember correctly, this actually came out when Fluenderies came out. So interestingly enough, it was of course the best deck, and that's always going to be essentially the best deck. You're going to have like Fluenderies and Labyrinth and like Eldritch, and it's essentially all of the decks that you hate playing on ladder put into an event, and now everybody's forced to play them. So this one can be really, really annoying. I remember I didn't have too much fun with it. I don't remember what I really played. I think I played a Ritual deck at the time. I almost forgot. You can play Ritual decks, obviously, because they don't use the extra deck either. So, honestly, I found this one to be really annoying. Maybe not F tier, but really annoying for sure. Next is the Fusion Festival. The Fusion Festival, I'd say, is probably around B tier. The Fusion Festival was good at the time that it came out. There was, I don't believe at the time we had Despia, or we had Despia at the time, but we didn't have like the full Despia deck. So Fusion Festival is interesting. If we had it today, and I'm basing this on if we had the event today, not when it was in existence at the time, because truthfully some of these happened a year and a half, 2 years ago, so I can't really remember every single deck that was all around at every single event. But if we were to have this today, the Fusion Festival, I think it would be fun, but Despia would without a doubt dominate it, and it would definitely need to be hit on the ban list to some degree. Generally speaking, I think Fusion is kind of become one of the better summoning mechanics in the game recently. It's like been really good. There's so many ways to fusion summon. They keep finding new ways to cheat fusion summoning. But honestly, I think this one would actually be pretty fun. I'd say B tier is fair, maybe even A tier if I'm being honest. But again, it just kind of locks down to fusions, and then Super Poly just becomes an auto win. So whoever goes second and activates Super Poly essentially just wins the game, because there's so many good Super Poly targets, especially against Dark decks, which are the best decks in the Fusion Festival. So I'd say probably B tier, somewhere around there. Limit 1 I thought was fantastic, and I think it'd still be good today. Limit 1 is interesting because Limit 1, essentially what it does is every single card in the game is limited to 1. There's no additional ban list. Maybe they hit like self-decay and stuff like that, but other than that, basically everything in the game is limited to 1. And I thought that was really, really cool. Because it essentially nerfs every single deck, but it doesn't make every single deck unplayable. So essentially, you're just playing engines. You're just playing this, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of this. You're playing Orbital Hydroland. You're just playing a bunch of different cards that are essentially all limited to 1. You have a few different engines, and it's kind of cool because you almost like you never really brick because everything's at 1 anyway. And I found this really interesting because again, it kind of limits the entire game, so there's like a natural kind of nerf to everything. So no one deck is like really good, and everyone's kind of playing like a cool pile deck, and you're kind of like comparing and contrasting and seeing what other people are playing. And generally, this one was a little bit easier on the wallet because you don't have to invest a lot of gems, because obviously everything's limited to 1 anyway. I remember for this one, I played like a going second pile deck with just a bunch of good going second cards. They were all once per turn, and it was just really, really fun. I really, really enjoyed this event. Probably one of the best ones. NR is fantastic. I still to this day think it's the best event. Some people have said that because of the ban list that NR has, it's not the best event because there are certain decks that are just much, much better than the others. And that is true, right? So for example, Metal Foes and Megalith are two decks that are like by far probably stronger than every other deck, but that's because their ban list didn't hit the decks. The ban list doesn't hit those two decks. They don't really hit Megalith, and the ban list doesn't really hit Megalith and Metal Foes, for example, but it hits, for example, like Phantasm Spirals gets hit pretty hard on the NR ban list. So Phantasm Spiral isn't quite as good, but of course you've got like those two decks that I said that are very, very good. So, you know, if they just adjust the ban list, I think it would be the best. But I think what makes NR the best is that it's all commons and it's all rares. And the reason NR is so good is because essentially the investment cost to make a new deck is like near zero. Like it literally is just totally irrelevant. You can play around and create new decks and not even have to worry about it. I think when this event was going, and I think this event happened like a year and a half ago at least, when this event was going, I kid you not, I probably had like 10, 15 different decks that I made in rotation. I would just screw around and be like, oh, I'm going to make a new deck. And the investment cost was like irrelevant. It didn't even matter. I would just like, create a new deck. I'm like, oh, I'm going to create a Chaos deck. Oh, I'm going to create I think I made like an Aqua Actress deck, Phantasm Spiral deck. I was playing different decks, different summoning mechanics. I didn't care about winning. I didn't care about losing. It was just fun, and it was very easy to create a new deck without even thinking about it. And it didn't really matter what was matter, what wasn't matter. It was exactly the perfect spirit of the entire event. Now, obviously, I will concede there are certain decks that are like a lot better, and they probably have to nerf some of them. But generally, I really, really like this event. Probably one of my favorites. Synchro is pretty good. I'd say Synchro is on par with, probably a little worse than Fusion. The problem with Synchro is it was a bit infuriating because they hit Synchrons, and Synchrons was like, there's a finally, right? Synchrons finally get a chance to shine. This is a pure Synchro deck, and they hit Synchrons, which was like insane. They didn't hit Sword Soul, and if you know anything about this, Sword Soul is probably the most consistent Synchro deck to ever come out. It is incredibly easy to set up, and that, of course, dominated the entire event. If you have Sword Souls, you essentially had just a really good advantage against everybody else. And that's kind of my issue with it. Sword Soul's a little too good in it, so they need to hit it. They definitely would need to undo Synchrons, because I think they hit them a little too badly. XYZ Festival, we actually had this, I believe we had XYZ Festival 2 times. XYZ Festival, I'd say, is probably on par with like Synchro, Fusion, like all the pure festivals are probably somewhere around there. Because the problem with the pure festivals is there's always like a deck that is significantly better than all of the other decks, and that deck sort of dominates. Now they've released a lot more archetypes in the game, so like Blackwings are now are now playable, where they weren't at the beginning. Well, they were, but like a weaker version. You've got XYZ, you have like Zodiacs and a bunch of other stuff. And I remember when they first had the XYZ event, this was one of their first events that they ever ran, so the ban list wasn't as comprehensive. So you had stuff like Eldritch at the time, and you had stuff like Phantasm Spirals, and you had decks that essentially never XYZ summoned once, but people were playing regardless. But I think it's probably somewhere around B tier. Obviously, there's certain cards that definitely need to be hit for this event to be a lot more playable, but I think B tier is quite fair. Anti-Spell was actually quite interesting. I thought I would hate it. I thought it was going to be when it came out, right, this is essentially a festival where you do not play spell cards. And it came out around the time Trap Tricks came out, which was obviously the best trap deck that came out at the time. I think it was pre-Labyrinth. So I thought when it came out, I would absolutely hate it, and I thought I would put it in like a D tier or F tier. Because I'm like, spells are some of my favorite cards in the game. But actually, and what I also thought was it was going to be like a trap heavy festival, because obviously, if you know spells, there are a lot of card starters for a lot of decks. If you don't have spells, it can be really bad. But man, was I wrong? Like, there was a lot of different decks that you could use. And me personally, I remember using a going second pile deck. I used Dangers, and I actually used to use Jinzo. Like, I used a really cool going second pile deck, and it really wasn't that bad of a festival not having spell cards. I actually thought it was quite fun. Next is Synchro XYZ. I actually like Synchro XYZ. I think it's A tier. It's basically all the best synchros, all the best XYZs. They don't hit the extra deck to the point where it limits what you can play. Because the problem is when you create only XYZs or only synchro or only fusion, the issue is that you create essentially decks that are only good. That are like you essentially find the best pure deck, and that deck dominates the entire event. So for example, with the fusion, again, it's Despia with Branded, they dominate the entire event. With Synchro, with Sword Soul, they dominate the entire event. When you have two different summoning mechanics, it actually makes it somewhat interesting because you have a variety of different options, and maybe the best deck isn't always the best deck, and you have at least a few competing decks that are going to be the best decks in the festival. So it definitely made it a lot better. I'd say it's somewhere around there. I don't remember exactly what I used for this one, but it was I remember it being quite fun. Next is Link Regulation. Link Regulation is probably the worst festival we've ever had. It's not that I have anything against Link monsters per se. I think they're an easy to use summoning mechanic, and that makes it quite good. The issue with Link Festival that made it such a disaster is that it was essentially a ranked ladder, and this is the only time that they've done it outside of the Duelist Cups. It was literally a ranked ladder, and the only way you could get the rewards is by the same way you play ranked. You just win more games. You win 51% of your games essentially, and you keep ranking up. That was the only way to do it. It was an absolute grind fest, and at the time, I think there were only like 2 decks that were really meta viable, and I believe, if I remember correctly, and it wasn't even like for example, Adagnisters got hit despite the fact that they have a bunch of XYZ and Synchro monsters that you need to use. They still got hit, so they picked and chose the winners. Salamangreats, I remember, was like the best deck, along with Marincess, and I remember there being one more deck. I don't remember exactly what it is, but there was one more deck, and the only rogue option in the entire thing was Legendary Ocean, and that was completely countered by Marincess. So you had this meta of essentially 3 decks every single time you were playing against one of those 3 decks, or you were playing one of those 3 decks. And if you weren't playing those 3 decks, you couldn't have fun, you couldn't earn the prizes. It was the setup of this festival that just made it very, very unplayable. But generally, like Links, again, I don't have a problem with Links. It's just the setup of this festival was horrific, because it was basically like Ranked Part 2. Very, very poorly made. I didn't enjoy it. And the sleeves, a lot of people still have never earned those sleeves because they were the only way to get them. And unless you played through that treacherous ladder, you didn't earn the sleeves. I got the sleeves. I got lucky. But, you know, it sucks that it was kind of behind that wall. Theme Chronicle is an interesting one. Theme Chronicle is basically all of the decks from the story mode, the solo mode, I should say. And if you haven't already figured this out, the decks in the solo mode are already naturally kind of not as good as the decks in the meta. So, for example, Tearlaments is not in the solo mode. Sword Soul is not in the solo mode. You've got a lot of decks that are just not in the solo mode that are really, really good. None of the really, really good decks are in the solo mode. Now, you might say, well, what about Tenyi, right? Tenyi's in the solo mode. Yeah, Tenyi's in the solo mode, but Tenyi's only like a part of Sword Soul. You have Herald, for example, but Herald is only a part of its own deck because you have to play Drytrons. So a lot of like the tier 0 decks aren't in solo mode, so there's a natural like hit to it. I'd say it's probably like an A tier because anytime they reduce the power level of the game, it becomes more fun because you just have a lot more back and forth. In general, and that's generally the best part of the festivals is when they reduce the power of all of the decks, right? They reduce the power level of all of the decks. There's no tier 0 format. There's no best deck. And when you have that situation, you have back and forth games where you can play a lot of different decks and there's not a huge investment cost. And that is usually the best kind of festivals. And that's why Limit 1 and are at the top, because they're very fun to play and there's not a lot of investment cost to them because you just essentially grab a bunch of different one-ofs, or you grab a bunch of NRs, so it doesn't matter. And Theme Chronicle's cool too because you get a lot of this stuff. Like, for example, Shiranui was a great deck for this festival because you get essentially a Shiranui structure deck close to free out of the solo mode, so it is pretty cool. Duelist Cup, at first I had Duelist Cup rated as like different Duelist Cups because they had Duelist Cup 1, Duelist Cup 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 6, a month apart from 5. But we've had a lot of different Duelist Cups, and depending on the meta, it's been less and more enjoyable. But I swear to you, I don't know what it is. Every time there's a Duelist Cup, it's like the worst meta possible. I don't know how they do it. I remember the first Duelist Cup, they had like... the first Duelist Cup, I remember it was Crystron Heckler Fibrax, and it was that entire loop with the Mecha Fantabeast Auradon, and then the following one was like the Flundereeze one. I remember there was one with like tier 0 Tearlaments, and then there was tier 0 Pearly, and it's like, dude, why do they always pick it at the worst possible time? And then this past one was with the new Despia support that summons a monster onto your board and then locks you out of playing the game. It's like they pick the worst possible time to have Duelist Cup. When we have a nice open format with like a lot of different decks that can top and it's fun and everyone's enjoying it, nah, that's not a time to have a Duelist Cup. The best time to have a Duelist Cup is when there's an absolute tier 0 and no one wants to play ranked, so let's go make people play ranked somewhere else. It's horrific. Attribute was actually pretty fun. I'd say it's probably an A tier. 4 attribute is basically the 4 attributes that aren't as used as Light and Dark. Light and Dark are by far the best attributes in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! 4 attribute is like all of the other attributes that aren't those 4 attributes. This one was quite fun because it gave you an opportunity to use other attributes from other decks. Like, so water is really underused. Fire has been historically underused. Earth, wind, just the really underused types. And you had a bunch of cool decks, right? For Earth, you had like Madolche, Earth Machines. You had that stuff. You had, for water, you have all of the water support. Paleozoics, Sharks, although they got hit too badly to really be played. But water, stuff like that. For fire, at the time, fire wasn't really that good, I'm not going to lie to you, because they didn't have anything. They didn't have the fire extinguishers yet. They didn't have any of that stuff. Fire was really in a rough place. And then you had winds. So you, like, if you wanted to, you could play like Harpies and unfortunately Flundereeze. But they hit Flundereeze quite significantly, so it wasn't quite as good in this event, which they need to do. But yeah, this one I'd say is probably around A tier. It was fun, but I would maybe even put it in B tier. It was like fun, but not super memorable. I'd say probably B tier is better. Legend Anthology is good. I almost want to put it in A tier. So Legend Anthology is essentially they take a bunch of decks from the show and they're legal. There's a few that slip through the crack, like Suship's, and a few other like lower tier decks that don't have a lot of UR. So Suship always slips through. You have things like one of the best investment decks ever, legendary. It's the Warriors. I forget what they're called. They're Beast Warriors, Ancient Warriors. Ancient Warriors are the ones they always slip through the crack. I swear to you, Ancient Warriors is playable in like 95% of these festivals. The best thing you could do from a cost standpoint in Master Duel is craft an Ancient Warrior or a Suship deck. They slip through every single festival and they're always playable. But outside of that, basically what this is they take a bunch of decks from the show and the decks from the show are fully legal. So think Blue Eyes, think Dark Magician, think random insect decks, like think just any deck from the show, just Legendary Ocean, but I think that one got hit on the ban list a little bit because they didn't want that to be too playable. But think of any deck that was on the show, and it is playable in this event. And in addition to that, because the decks from the show generally aren't as good, they're not as strong, because obviously they don't want to overpower a deck like Blue Eyes or Dark Magician or something like that, because if they overpower them, then they have to hit them, and they don't want to hit those decks because a lot of casual fans like those decks. So the power level of those decks is generally a lot lower than other decks. Plus, because they do that, they can now hit all the hand traps, so they can hit stuff like Maxi and Ash Blossom, and Floodgates can all get hit. All of that stuff can all get hit, and it actually creates a really, really fun game environment, but where, again, they hit a bunch of stuff on the ban list. They hit a lot of since they hit so many decks, and only really like rogue decks were even playable, they could hit a lot of hand traps, and the end boards wouldn't be too crazy because, again, they hit a lot of the really, really good generic monsters that you would go into. So most of the time you'd end on like a Galaxy Eyes, or in archetype Blue Eyes card, in archetype Dark Magician card. You wouldn't end on anything outrageous, so that made it a lot of fun. Next is Legend Anthology Academy. I think this one was honestly pretty close. This was, if anything, it was a little bit better because it was essentially Legend Anthology, the sequel to Legend Anthology, because they essentially just added like Heroes and Crystal Beast and Ancient Warriors, like all of the decks that didn't make it through the first time got added to this. And of course they did hit some of the really, really like over the top good stuff, but they left these decks fully playable. Again, Maxi was hit, Maxi was gone, a lot of the floodgates were gone. Like, it was a very tranquil time where you could try new decks, and it wasn't hugely consequential because, again, a lot of the really, really good stuff was gone. So there wasn't like disgusting, insane end boards. You might end on 2 interruptions, and it's like, okay, this is as good as it's going to get in this event. And you had a lot of back and forth. It wasn't irregular to have a 5-turn, 10-turn game, which is hopefully how Yu-Gi-Oh should be played. Next this is Monster Type. This is the Monster Type Festival that we had. This is Monster Type. I believe this was, I'll leave it here. I think it was just a little bit too small in terms of the typing. This is the one with fairies and fiends. And this was clearly a very pushed event because they wanted to, I believe they dropped the new Despia Dark Lord pack, and they obviously wanted to sell that because, I mean, this is essentially what Despia Dark Lord is. It's fairies and fiends. But yeah, this one was actually quite fun. There's a lot of fairy decks that are good. There's a lot of fiend decks that are good. So you had like Burning Abyss that you could play. You had some other stuff that you could play. But I'd say the issue with this deck, and my largest issue, issue with this event, is that I think it was just too narrow. And if anything, maybe I'll put it in C tier. And I actually played where at the time was the best deck in this. I think I was playing Dark Lord Despia at the time, and it was fun because it was my first time actually like playing that deck ever. So I used the first Dark World, stuff like that, and I was actually amazed at like how good the deck actually performed. But I think it was just a bit too narrow for me. There wasn't as large of a, like, it could have been a fun event, but I think it was just too few cards that you could actually use. So I'd say it's probably in C tier, but if they kind of expand this, it could be fun. Again, if they picked like 4 or 5 types, it could be a really fun event, but sometimes 2 types is incredibly specific, and you end up seeing a lot of mirror matches, a lot of the same thing. I remember Despia was huge. A lot of decks like that were huge, but I just wish that they would expand the amount of decks, types that you could use in this. Next is Ritual. Ritual is the most recent one. I'd say it's right down the middle. It's not outrageous. It wasn't like outrageously fun, but I think this had some of the best loner decks that we've ever had. Obviously, this event was dropped, so you could buy a cheeseburger deck. But again, the loner decks were quite good. Everyone played the event. A lot of things were banned, and like you were essentially forced to play rituals, which is the point of the event, and they did a very good job with that. But generally speaking, I just found it to be not super duper fun. I thought that certain decks just had too much of an advantage over all of the other decks, and certain turns would just take what felt like forever, because again, they didn't really lower the ceiling of the deck, because like, for example, with Megalith, they would just go on and on and on and on, and they kind of got rid of a lot of hand traps. which was a bit frustrating. So it made the decks kind of outrageous. I remember for this one, I believe I played Chaos Max, a nice quick Chaos Max deck where I could just give my opponent a incantation and then just attack it and win the game. So it was very easy to play, but it wasn't super fun for me personally. Versus Light or Dark was a great concept. So basically it was like you picked a light deck or a dark deck. It was a monotype deck, and then you basically played. I'd say it was probably around, it was interesting, but they could have balanced it more. I would almost put it in S tier, but I guess the balancing was the only issue I really had with it, which was you could play a light deck or you could play a dark deck. Dark was significantly better than light. Like, there were some good light decks. So you had, like, for example, Dogmatica, for example, was a good light deck. And then for dark, you had some good decks. Also, you had tons of good decks for dark. But the problem is a lot of decks are like mixed light and dark, so it can be a little frustrating when you're trying to do one or the other. Like I said, dark was by far better than light. Not a lot of people play Blue Eyes or Dark Magician. Most people played like meta archetypes, like Despia, for example, without the Lubellion. But most people were just playing regular meta strategies, and the decks were just kind of outrageous. If I'm going to be honest with you, I remember Dark won significantly, and there was a point where if you were playing a Dark deck, you literally couldn't find a game. Like that first day, I remember I was trying to play Dark World, and I could not find a game. I had to switch over to Despia to find any games whatsoever. I would wait. This is the first time in Master Duel where I would wait the entire full 30 seconds, and the thing would have to reset, and I would wait 30 seconds, and it would have to reset, and it just kept waiting and waiting until they finally were like, all right, we're just going to make Dark match up with Dark, because otherwise nobody wants to play light. And Dark obviously did end up winning the event, and I believe we got Dark sleeves because of it, or a Dark deck box or something like that. We got some sort of prize for it, which is kind of cool. And the prizing was actually quite cool for this event too. So definitely like A tier. Again, they just need to kind of maybe balance it out a little bit more. Hit some of the Dark decks because it was just significantly better. World Championship was cool. Again, I'm not a fan of like a competitive event taking over the event for the month, because I would rather have like any of this other stuff. Like any of this other stuff is more fun than a competitive event. But World Championship was cool. I'm going to put it in probably like C tier, only because the fact that you can, like, if you really think about it, right? The fact that you can download a game onto your, I don't know, like your Xbox, and then you can play a video game for a couple of days. And as a result of that, right, you don't need to invest any money in it, right? You just download a video game, you finish the solo mode, you build a deck, and then you play a video game for 3 days, and you can get an invite to Worlds. I mean, that's so much cooler than a Duelist Cup. Duelist Cup is essentially all of the grind with none of the recognition. This is the grind, obviously, but at the end of it, you get, a flight to Japan. You get to go to Worlds. You get to compete against the best duelists in the world. There's a lot of payoff for this one, whereas there's virtually no payoff for the Duelist Cup. You just grind for no reason for 3 days, and you have to grind in lead up to that. So really, it's like a 7-day grind for nothing. Whereas with this one, at least you get an invite to Worlds. That's the positive of it. The negative of it is, again, it replaces an event that you actually want to play, right? I want to play the fun. I want to play NR. I want to play Limit 1. I want to play Legend Anthology. I want to play all of these other awesome events. I don't want to sit here and I'm already grinding for rank to get to Master every single month. I don't want to also have to grind to do another grind on top of it. It's like a double grind. It's just too much grinding. I don't want to do it. So yeah, it's only in C tier because of that. But as far as the rewards, obviously the rewards are kind of cool. Being able to get a Worlds invite because you played a video game that you downloaded onto your PlayStation 4 is bananas to me, right? You got a Nintendo Switch and you can just download this game. That you get a computer with Steam. You can get a crappy laptop, download Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, finish the solo mode, build a Kashtira deck, and all of a sudden you're getting a flight to Japan. Like that's a crazy payoff. Next is Fusion XYZ. I think this is one of the more recent ones too. I'd say all of the blended ones are usually pretty cool. So Fusion XYZ, XYZ Synchro, they're pretty close. These are cool because they give you more variety to play. The problem with the problem with these monotypes is oftentimes you'll find a deck that is just by far the best. And the cool thing about Fusion XYZ is you can play both Fusions and XYZ, so you can go into like, Mirror Jade, and then you can go into Zeus. You know, it's kind of cool where you could do that. And again, you have all of the best XYZ decks, and you also have all of the best fusion decks. So it's a little bit more of a range of what you can see, which makes it a lot more fun. But at the same time, it does hit the meta significantly enough where you don't see like all of the different monsters. So you don't have all of the splashable engines. You don't have like access code talker. You don't have like sprite elf. You don't have like all of the other just generic splashable link monsters, synchro monsters, whatever isn't allowed in the festival, and it makes it kind of fun. Next is monster type Island, I think this was called. I actually quite like this one. I'd say it was probably somewhere in the top of A tier. This one was quite fun. Basically, they relegated this to the types of the game that aren't super duper usable. So I think it was like Beast, Beast Warrior, Wing Beast, Insect, and Plant maybe. I don't remember the exact ones, but I believe it was those. Maybe not Plant. Maybe it was Plant. Basically, everything you'd see on an island, theoretically. But it was cool. I believe it was like Fire King Island or something like that. It came out simultaneously with the Fire King deck in Japan. I remember the Fire Kings were a loner deck also. Now it sucks that they didn't release the new Fire King stuff, because then that would have actually been somewhat interesting to play. And I think at the same time they released the Insect Secret Pack too. So they had an Insect Secret Pack. They had the Fire Kings releasing in Japan, and they were just all like promotion to get essentially people to try out this new deck. And honestly, old Fire Kings, they hit so many decks that old Fire Kings was actually like regular old Fire Kings from like 2014 was like a reasonably fun playable deck. I think I just played the Fire King loner deck the entire time, and I had a pretty good win ratio with just a loner deck, which is kind of crazy. This is the first time I think in all of these events where I was like, you know what, I'm not even going to build a deck. I'm just going to play the loner deck. And I swear to you, that loner deck was like perfectly competitive enough to get me all of the gems, all of the stuff. I played Fire Kings again. It was at a reasonable level. I think the only time I really lost was against like the insects, because that deck was like by far the best, right? The insect pile deck, the Bee Trooper insect pile deck. But like other than that, like this was actually a reasonably fun event, and I had a good time with it. And I think they hit a significant amount of stuff on it, where again, it made it quite fun. When you hit a lot of floodgates and hand traps and stuff like that, it makes the event significantly more fun, and that's why it is an A tier. I think that is the last event here. If you disagree with me on anything, definitely let me know down below, and thank you for watching. La, 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 la.